Are you ready to begin?
I can barely stand.
Death does not wait for you to be ready.
I am gonna stop you.
You never did learn to mind your surroundings.
The very first time that I'd met with Chris after him asking me to play the role, he had said, you know, he really wanted me to be involved in the fighting technique so that it kind of looked organic and looked like something that I had invented myself.
I wanted to take it back to a grubbier place. A place where you feel the punches a bit more and you're actually a bit more concerned about the violence on screen.
Action.
I think there's been a lot of very, well, I think excessive use of, you know, wire work and martial arts and everything, to the point where the violence loses its threat because it's become a bit, I think, a bit dance-like, and we've become sort of comfortable watching it in that way.
You know, if you're in a fight situation, if Batman's got someone behind him and he can turn around and knock him out, headbutt him, why not? Why do a triple spin kick, double loop, you know, why not just knock him out?
We were looking for something that, when Batman threw a punch or a kick, it went through the person like a raging bull.
Once we started along those lines, and one of the stuntmen we had on the film, Buster Reeves, who's a jiu-jitsu world champion and extremely talented in martial arts, mentioned to Dave Foreman about a new martial arts system called Casey, or Casey Fighting Method.
Casey means from the heart, and it's also the nickname for the two founders of KFM, Husto and Andy Norman.
Andy and Husto, they developed Casey over 20 years. Action. They analysed tapes, they watched moves, all the different martial arts forms to develop it, put it together. And it's absolutely fantastic.
Take it away, boys. Throughout all the fighting movies, we've seen the traditional taekwondo, Muay Thai, the karate. We've seen all that, but we haven't seen KFM. In terms of martial arts, like Wushu has been created over hundreds of years. This is very, very new, and it's still evolving.
It's very much about being mentally aware of your environment, mentally aware of how people behave and respond to actions and reactions.
It's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to kill this man, or do you want to maim him? And that comes from you as a person. So, you know, it is a lethal art.
It's very practical. I mean, these guys actually train often in nightclubs and things, and they will smoke up the room, and it's all about using what's available and grabbing that ashtray and smacking somebody with it, or being able to have a fight with somebody while sitting next to them. And it's a really great fighting style.
And we felt that was exactly what we wanted for Batman, someone who, if he feels like he's going to headbutt you, that's what he does. It's just an emotional response.
We've had to kind of tame it down a bit, and it's to adapt their system into Dave Foreman's choreography.
And action. And because it's so tight and a tight fighting style, I had to adapt to make the moves bigger. So if I was throwing a punch to the face, I would just make that bigger. I would just, you know, make the circle bigger. The demonstration you just saw, I don't think you could actually break that down unless you saw that in slow motion. You couldn't quite see what was happening there, but the boys were actually breaking down each bone as they went up from the legs to the head. So it is something that you need a lot of control on, and so we move very, very slowly, and we build up layers till we feel very, very comfortable with it. Wonderful. Well done, boys.
Christian has unbelievable stamina. I mean, I've seen his workload every day. And if he does get 2 hours off in the morning, he has to rehearse a fight.
Jared's death is not your fault. It was What's your fires?
We had 16 fights in the movie for Christian to get through. Because he had such a heavy workload, we did a lot of blocking of the fights with stunt guys and just liaising with Chris Nolan on tape. Then we'd bring Christian in, put the acting element into the fight and perhaps tweak a few bits that felt character-wise like they should change. And they would make the changes. And then when we'd get on set, it would all change again. In terms of the fights, Christian learnt every single fight. He did every single fight. The Casey fighting was very close quarters, so it was a very dangerous art. The hits were very direct to very dangerous parts of the body, so we had to be very, very careful as not to injure our actors or our stuntmen, of course. A lot of the hits were like 2-3 inches away from the target, so every time.
Absolutely respect the stuntmen. This is what they do, and they can obviously do any of it in a vastly superior way to what I can do. But I always like to try it, you know? And I like the possibility of being able to have some kind of stunt sequence, and then you can zoom in and whatever, and, you know, and you see that it's a real person.
Basically, Christian learnt fights very quickly. He'd go home at night and he'd watch the tapes, and he'd literally come in the next day and know the fights. He has a photographic memory, so I would show him a fight, and it sickens me. Because, you know, I'd show him 20 moves, and then within half an hour, he would have all those 20 moves down. I can't do that, and I'm the fighter ranger.
I am the devil. You're not the devil. You're practice.
We all dream that we can take on 8 men at once and beat them all. And that's what the Bruce in these fight is like.
We see Bruce, you know, younger. He has no fighting skills whatsoever. There's no technique to him. He's adopted different styles, but he hasn't created his own style yet.
We wanted to demonstrate that he had some skill, but it was really more about courage and brutality. We brought 11 guys over from Thailand, put the moves together, discussed them, said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, or shouldn't he be stronger here?
He wanted 8 guys coming at one guy all at once, and I had real trouble with that, you know, because for 8 guys to attack one guy all at once is how am I going to put a fight? How am I going to choreograph? It was really quite hard
to have them all coming at him, so that he's having to work triple time to take care of them, as opposed to people standing waiting to get up at the corner of their eye, coming in, taking their hit. We found what helped that was to keep him moving. So by keeping him moving, people could drop in his wake and then come into him as well. Christian did the whole thing, actually. And Buster sort of did a few little inserts, but Christian did the whole fight.
We spent a lot of time determining exactly how much of Batman to show, how much of his fighting to show, and I had always looked to a representation of Batman that would be more from the criminal's point of view. So you would see less of him. You would see him as more frightening. There would be more suspense as to what he was doing and where he was.
Where are you?
Here. And that meant showing less of him, cutting fight scenes very, very fast, so that Batman is seen as being blindingly quick and aggressive and almost animal-like in the way he takes on the criminals.
You will never learn.
The monorail was the biggest challenge because it was the finale and we all want a big showdown. Batman is on equal terms now with Ducard. I think we feel that they are equal to each other. It was punch for punch, kick for kick, and that's what made it very intense and dynamic.
Now we can really focus on using the Casey style at the end, and it's worked out really strong.
As a team, all of us, we all put that fight together and that energy together.
Liam and Christian were keen to be involved, to rehearse. In fact, you know, if they weren't doing anything, they'd actually call and say, look, you know, why don't we rehearse? Liam was a strong fighter. Casey's actually a fighting system where you use a lot of elbows and fists, and Liam's very tall. I think he's 6'4", 6'5". He's a tall guy. So he has to get very low in order to do the blows.
Ready, and action.
We just wanted it to be as hard as possible. We wanted to show two men who are very highly trained and very highly skilled, very motivated.
When I saw the enjoyment out of when Liam had finished the sequence and Christian, you could just see the glee in their face when they finished that sequence, when they've just done 10, 15 move sequence. And that's the best.
Got it there. Right, sweetie. You guys all right? Yes.
I was extraordinarily impressed with the speed and the degree of intensity that the actors were able to get into the action scenes by doing things themselves rather than having the stunt performers do things for them. There's something in action and in fighting that is still very much performance. And so, as a director, I find it to be a great advantage to have actors like Liam, like Christian, who are willing to just dive in and express the character's physicality, even in the most extreme situations.
Never learn to mind your surroundings.
My biggest challenge was to make the KFM, the Casey, work on screen. And hopefully it's new, creative, and that's what's good about the KFM. You can be creative with it. You can be very creative with it.
It was just kind of bizarre enough to get your attention and think, what the hell is he doing? And then absolutely vicious enough, but also practical enough to believe it.
Casey reflected quite nicely our overall approach in terms of script and design of seeing Batman not as a glamorous sort of branded figure, decorative figure, but as a functional entity. We wanted the look of Gotham to have a recognizable texture, like a sort of New York on steroids.
Between set builds, miniatures, locations, we can create a world.
Roll cameras!
We have a true working set that's on the scale of a real city.
The guys that we've got here have managed to build what they've built in 100 days.
Had a whole river flowing through it and waterfalls. Like on the 5th day, I'd find a different section of the set.
This film is a designer's dream, really.
The overall tone and feel of the film is reality, but heightened reality. What does a comic suggest to you in your mind? That's the world of Gotham we're actually trying to create.
We kind of realized that I needed to start designing key elements of the film to help him as he wrote.
We started to develop the look of Gotham in parallel with the script development. What I wanted to do was to build up the world of Gotham as a sort of exaggerated contemporary New York.
We'd taken trips to New York. Gotham has always been based on New York, and to Chicago. And we'd been looking at places like the old Kowloon City in Hong Kong. And we were really looking around, you know, how we were going to go about designing a city. This is a model of what really are the slums of Gotham that I made myself in Chris's garage. Obviously, we pretty much went up all the way to the roof.
Having Nathan in the garage, sticking models together and just coming up with the look of the film, it just worked amazingly well, and it sort of advanced our process.
Visual effects are very important for being able to help create the environment of Gotham City.
Chris wanted a degree of realism which he felt he hadn't seen before in visual effects work. He really wanted to show just what a monstrously overwhelming place Gotham City is. The description in the script was that Bruce looks out of the window of his executive jet and he sees the spires of Gotham catching the first gold of dawn as the sun rises. This is a key shot for us in establishing our ability to create photorealistic landscapes for the film. We've added piers and jetties. We've added things like smoke plumes. We've got all the boats are now in the shot. And all of this was actually sourced from reality.
You sort of essentially build buildings in 3D, but you map photographs onto them. So you get the shape from 3D modeling, and then you get the photographic reality from photos taken actually in Chicago. We shot something maybe like there's close to 1 million photographs on this show. Sort of gathering all the possible photographic sources from Chicago we could, day and night, rain, sun, snow, the whole thing.
And so what we've got here is an aerial plate, and basically what the camera's doing is it's supposed to be following the monorail train round the corner, heading towards Wayne Tower, which is going to be down at the end of the street here. The streets had to be completely clear, so the city has a ghostly look to it. We're going to need to make this look like this whole thing is alive. Here's our finished shot, which follows the monorail train. We've added in Wayne Tower down at the end of the street. All the vehicles you see driving across the bridges and down the road there, these are all digitally created. There was a point at which we achieved a certain standard of realism on this shot. That made Chris feel that it was possible to produce photoreal cityscapes that would fit in with the rest of the photography of Chicago and the big Gotham City set.
In terms of looking at Wayne Manor, we've decided to represent the way the audience sees the wealth of the Wayne family, which is very important to our story.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
We've chosen an approach to design that gets away from the sort of simple wood paneling and suits of armor, that kind of thing that's become very familiar to audiences as a portrayal of money. We want to show to them in a fresh way, and so there is a slightly different emphasis on the look of the place and the feel of the place than we've felt before.
After seeing about 20 manor houses, we came across Mentmore, which sits about an hour and a half north of London. And what's particular about this place is it has a white interior, which suddenly occurred to us that because he returns some years later after his parents' death, we could really play the white interior as a mausoleum, like the place has been closed up. And suddenly that sparked off all these ideas, well, we could have everything draped and shrouded and all the carpets rolled up and the white marble floor exposed and just this really unfriendly place.
In imagining the Batcave, we set out to look at the origin myth as it's been portrayed in the comic book, and we were very drawn to the notion of existing caverns underneath Wayne Manor rather than something that's constructed.
Because it's Batman Begins, we wanted to explain who dug the Batcave, you know? How does that work, you know? How does he pour 500 million tons of concrete in in secret? We really wanted to explain that the Batcave isn't a man-made place. It sits under Wayne Manor, and it's a cave.
Gradually, over the course of the film, we start to build up the idea of the larger world of Batman and the larger world of the Batcave.
The Batcave was on the H stage at Shepperton Studios, and that was sort of the next garage.
The Batcave starts with rigging, then we go into wood, and then we cast these sheets, thousands of sheets. These are cast off existing rocks. Up above, you'll see those arches up there. They're basically the foundations of Wayne Manor. And we're saying this was an underground lake that's drained out, so we're actually building a river that runs through here. And slowly but surely, we end up with a Batcave.
We actually ended up flooding the whole stage because it was just easier rather than building self-contained tanks. Chris was a little bit dubious about flooding the stage, but I think after he saw the immensity of the water we put into it, he realised it was probably the best thing to do. It was an element where you got lots of reflections and twinkles that, you know, it was a dark set, and that just brought it out and made it a living cave, really.
The Batcave is a very realistic environment, and so my goal was to try to light it in a realistic way and keep that believability going. We're dealing with black walls, somewhat reflective walls, which helps quite a bit. And then we're dealing with Batman in a matte black costume, so you have to try to figure out exactly how you're going to separate one from the other. Luckily, working with my gaffer, Perry Evans, we started to crack it a little bit and figure out exactly how we were going to bring some of the light into the Batcave without seeing them, because there's a roof over much of the Batcave, and we have to find a way to sneak the light in. And then specifically lighting the first scene that Bruce Wayne sees the Batcave.
In order to master your fear, you kind of have to dive into it. Bruce decides that in order to become Batman, he's going to immerse himself in the bats beneath Wayne Manor, that he's going to have to be comfortable with that before he can really become Batman.
We knew we were going to have to do digital bat shots. We did an early on test trying to use real bats to see how they would play, but they tend to, not be very cooperative. I think one day of shooting with those convinced everybody that we were going to go digital with the bats.
And then seeing bats swarming all over you. Swarming all around.
You start from reality, of course. So we actually digitally scanned some dead bats to get their full-on shape, recreate those in 3D, paint them up, texture them to make them look like real bats. In order that we can have bats fly around in there, what we actually did, we used a thing called a LiDAR scanner. It's basically a laser that sweeps across the surface of objects. It's used by the military and also used in visual effects all the time now. And it records the three-dimensional shape of the environment. So by doing this, we can basically build a 3D version of the set. And then we can use that to sort of have the bats avoid objects and have them correspond to real objects as you photograph the plate as well. I think these days visual effects has sort of expanded its role storytelling-wise. Now you can do things that you couldn't do before. You can do them seamlessly, and you can do them fairly cost-effectively. And I think once you saw where we could go with that, you realized that, yes, avoiding all that back guano is definitely the way to go.
We always knew we had to build a majority of the Narrows as a set because it's something we couldn't find. So we are building a section of the Narrows for real in this giant airship hangar.
When we first started looking at Cardington, I think that there was probably a certain amount of skepticism from everybody, really, because it wasn't a ready-made stage by any means. It actually took us 10 months from the moment we took over that place to the moment where we were able to shoot in there.
When you are in Gotham and Cardington, you think that you are in a major city because it's so vast. It's almost like a limitless set. Far and away the largest stage that I've ever worked in.
It's like putting 8 of the largest LA sound stages in one building.
We built a model of the hangar so that we could make sure that what we were designing would fit within the hangar and would work within the space. Big advantage here, and what I think the designer and director liked, was the height that we've got. We've basically got 160-foot height.
The set is a sort of complex series of areas. So you'll turn a corner and you're in the Narrows, and you'll turn another corner, you're on a Gotham street. And then, the Gotham Street gives background to the Narrows, so it all becomes a giant set build.
We've managed to build a city, an actual freeway, a borough, and then a downtown area, all in the same building.
Basically, we're incorporating 2 parts of Gotham City, the Narrows. As it sounds, it's a very narrow part of the set, and the buildings are all overhanging, lots of balconies. It's quite a tight space to work in. And then the second part of the set, which is beyond us, further down the hangar, is really the main drag of Gotham. Main drag will have a lot of traffic in. We're looking at running, maybe 50-odd cars through the set. And then under the structure itself of the hangar, we've got a full freeway. So that's 3 lanes of traffic running the entire length of the hangar. There's quite a lot of stuff involved with that. Obviously, we've got to work out all the road markings. The traffic lights are all wired up. A lot of the street dressing that were brought in, we actually bought in America and had it shipped across. As part of the design of the set, we've had to lay in cabling under the ground so that we can get all our steam effects up through the manhole covers and the drains. So there's a lot of work.
To me, it really is the space that looks the most like a real city night exterior, and yet we lit every inch of it from scratch.
Because we had this fantastic indoor space, we were able to shoot during the day and make it look like night.
The best approach to lighting Cardington was from the inside out. We put different colored gels on the windows, we hung things inside the windows, and we brought it to a place where I think it really looks like a real city. So I'm quite proud of the way that the Narrows came out on film.
Action. You know, these sets are just phenomenal, that we've built this entire city of Gotham, you know, within this vast hangar here. It's a big production, but with such fine attention to detail.
It just gives the film a whole scope that I don't think it would have had if we were limited to a regular-sized stage.
Everything we did in that garage is in this film, so that was really, really great.
When you start to examine the realistic idea of why Bruce Wayne would dress up as a bat, the best explanation offered by the comics is the notion of him using fear against those who would use fear themselves.
Where are you?
Here. When he's looking for the most intimidating symbol that he can think of, he naturally gravitates towards the thing that has frightened him the most as a child. Essentially, Bruce Wayne becomes his own worst fear. The costume has to be frightening, or it has no purpose. For it to be intimidating and imposing, it had to have a sense of function that would play into the credibility of Bruce Wayne putting on this extraordinary costume.
Theatricality and deception are powerful agents. You must become more than just a man in the mind of your opponent.
What the hell?
But I wanted to combine that with a design that incorporated the more operatic, animal-like, organic qualities of the costume.
Chris wanted his legs to be more supple, and him to be able to kneel down when necessary. And he also really, more than any other thing, wanted Christian to be able to move his head more and not do the superhero movement of turning the shoulders and the head at once, you know?
The last versions of the costume had a very kind of industrial, almost kind of machine-made kind of look to it. Chris, with Lindy and Julian and Dan sculpting, were reducing it back to the human figure.
We came up with the idea that it was something like a combat outfit.
Nomex survival suit for advanced infantry.
It had a really high-tech inside mixed with a wetsuit. That would explain why it hugged the body and looked so sort of neat and sexy, really. You actually saw the inner workings of this suit. It's kind of carbon fiber plates. It protects the core of your body from falling below a certain temperature. He goes into the workshop and decides to spray it with a latex black spray, which removes the heat signature. So if you look with night glasses, which detect body heat, this refuses to allow you to see it. And as he tinkers with it, you see how he develops it from that into the black bat suit.
Once it was actually getting made for me, there's all sorts of interesting processes that you go through where you have to have your whole body, you know, molded.
A plaster Christian Bale is then produced out of that mold, and as soon as the concept sculpt was approved, it's literally broken down and remolded into the different parts of the costume. And the cowl, the torso, the legs, they all have to be sculpted individually from that original one piece. Getting the foam as black as possible was a problem, as that reduces the durability. We're not painting the foam, it's kind of the foam as it is. When those molds have been injected, they're cooked in a big oven, and then they come out of those molds. They're wet. It's just a very efficient way, it's just to put it through an old Victorian housemaid's mangle just to extract the water. The piece taken out and dried, they're then prepared for trimming. The mold doesn't produce like a cookie cutter kind of effect. There are flashings, these sort of waste areas on the edges of the foam that have to be trimmed back before it's glued down to the suit. And they're trimmed very patiently by our wonderful girls in art trimming. It has to appear as if it's cut by laser and not by hand. It's not the most comfortable thing to wear. I mean, it is foam latex, it's hot. But on the first day shooting, Christian managed to wear it all day, including the cowl and the gloves, not really wanting to take it off. So I think the level of comfort has improved somewhat as well. The cowl itself is very expressive. This man's angst really shows through on the sculpt. Rather than being a mask, it actually shows his character.
I love the sensitiveness of it. You can feel the workings of his face underneath it.
It gives you this huge neck, you know, kind of like a panther, this real kind of feral look, you know, as you're going to pounce on somebody all the time.
I was just surprised at how intimidating he becomes and how much it changes him.
He really channels this other character. When he's confronting an individual that he wants to take down, he kind of ceases to be human.
I swear to God. Swear to me!
There's naturally, after 6 months of filming, a kind of a love-hate relationship with the thing, because you get headaches in that thing, you know? And I kind of say to myself, use it. You know, the guy's meant to be kind of fierce. When you get a headache, you feel fierce anyway. You know, you got no time for anybody, you're impatient. So I just said to myself, use it, you know? And I just put up with it, you know? This is a hell of an honor, really, getting to wear this.
In the comic books, the cape flows, and you always see Batman crouch like a gargoyle on the edge of a building, and the cape kind of billows and drapes around him.
Chris really, really wanted the romanticness from the comics of the cloaks. So they had to be supple and they had to be able to take the wind.
We did prototype using actual velvet fabric.
One, go.
We got quickly bogged down because it got waterlogged and, you know, became sort of too heavy. So we invented our own fabric.
Which is the finest parachute silk, which is a nylon, so it's waterproof. And then flocked, which means you shoot little tiny hairs into it. So it ends up as if it's a velvet pile. So it's got the animal feeling on the outside and the waterproof nature and the lightweightness that it flies.
I was doing a lot of research with the Department of Defense, and there's something called memory fabric that they're experimenting with now. It's very soft and supple, but when an electrical current is applied to it, it can take on a rigid shape.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
He uses the cape and cowl to create a symbol that the people of Gotham will either respect or fear.
What the hell is that?
What the hell are you? A man who is just flesh and blood can be defeated, can be destroyed, whereas a symbol can transcend the idea of just being one man.